Hi, my name is Anissa De Leon, and this is my presentation on Module 22, Cognitive Views of Memory. So first we're going to be looking at the information processing system. Here I've inserted the photo from our textbook that kind of gives a good general explanation of how everything works together in our memory. Think of the information processing system as the way that your brain receives, understands, keeps, and recalls knowledge. Our textbook refers to our brain as a computer, or a bunch of computers all with a unique task in information processing. Information processing has many stages. They are sensory memory, working memory, and long-term memory. Here we will be looking into sensory and working memory. So sensory memory is the first step in the information processing model. This is where our brains decipher and make sense of the stimuli that our bodies receive. This could be anything that we hear, see, taste, smell, or feel. Sensory memory has a large capacity load, even if the duration of a stimuli only lasts a second. This is why you may continue to feel the pain of a pinch on your arm even after contact is lost, and see an image of a photograph after closing your eyes. Sensory memory has two important components. They are perception and attention. Perception and attention are critical components of sensory memory for many reasons. Let's look into it. Perception is defined in our textbook as the process of detecting a stimulus and assigning meaning to it. We construct this meaning by using our existing knowledge and the physical representations in the world around us, such as symbols and patterns. Perception has three stages. These stages lead to the saving and storing of knowledge. They are bottom-up processing, gestalt, and prototypes. In the first stage of perception, we have bottom-up processing. The best way I can think of describing this is literally analyzing a stimulus from the bottom up. A good example could be, say, a chair. From the bottom, you see 4 vertical posts that are the legs of the chair. And then moving up, you see a square or rectangular shaped cushion. And moving up further from that is a rectangular curved back part of the chair that is also attached to the cushion by 2 more vertical posts. Recognizing this from the bottom up, we can process the pattern, which helps us recognize other objects as chairs when we see them in the future. They don't have to look the exact same, but knowing the pattern of a chair, the 4 legs, the cushion, the back of the chair, helps us recognize and see other things that follow that same pattern, say in our mind, hey, that's a chair. Next we have Gestalt. Gestalt is the German word for pattern or configuration. Gestalt is what helps us put the single parts that we analyze in bottom-up processing into meaningful patterns or relationships. This helps us perceive stimuli as an organized whole instead of the individualized parts. Lastly, we have prototypes. Prototypes are what our brains store in our memory as the best example or best representation of a category of some stimuli. With using our chair example, you can say the word chair and close your eyes, and you'll have a small little prototype of a chair pop up in your mind. It's not a specific chair, it's not any one chair that you know and see every day, but it's a general pattern of a chair that your brain is storing so that you can recall that information later when you need it. Now let's look at the role of attention. Something important about attention is that it is selective. We can pay attention to only one cognitively demanding task at a time. Attention takes a lot of practice. Once we practice enough, tasks that used to take a lot of attention and concentration become automatic. Our brains tend to focus our attention on stimuli that we are familiar with because we have practiced and now recognize those patterns. Attention plays an important role in sensory memory because it helps guide and determine what stimuli students are processing. For example, your teacher may be giving an important lesson on division, but you just can't focus on what they are saying because the person sitting next to you is incessantly clicking their pen over and over. It is hard to pay attention to something that you do not know or have not been practicing. You can't pay attention to what your teacher is saying because the 2 conflicting audible stimuli are fighting for your attention, and you are more familiar with the sound of a clicking pen than the division process. Just as paying attention to certain stimuli over others can negatively impact the student's learning, it can also improve it. Using certain stimuli, like the ring of a bell to bring students' attention back to you, bringing in a brightly colored painting to the start of an art lesson, or offering a variety of tasks for a lesson, can all help students focus their attention on the lesson content and retain knowledge. Okay, now it's time for our turn and talk. I want you guys to think about what are specific strategies you can use in your future classroom to encourage and maintain focused attention in your students. All right, now we're going to be talking about working memory. This is the second part of the information processing system. It is what you are using right now for whatever you are thinking about. Working memory takes in new information from your sensory memory and existing knowledge from your long-term memory to comprehend and solve problems. Unlike sensory memory, working memory has a very small capacity, about 15 to 20 seconds of holding time for information. This is why it's hard to make sense of a lesson if your instructor is speaking rapidly. By the time you make sense of the information in your working memory, your teacher seems to be on a completely different topic. Working memory is not to be confused with short-term memory. Short-term memory is more of a storage unit for information, whereas working memory is both temporary storage of information and active processing of that information. The central executive is the part of working memory that is responsible for monitoring and directing attention and other mental resources. It deals with reason and language comprehension and transfers information to long-term memory via rehearsing and recording. The phonological loop is a part of working memory. It is the memory rehearsal system, essentially. This is where information is stored when you are repeating information back to yourself that you can immediately recall and remember it. The phonological loop has a large capacity and can hold as much information here as you can rehearse. Lastly, the visual-spatial sketchpad is like a mental sketchpad for visual and spatial information. It creates a mental visual image for you to solve problems. For example, if you're thinking of the letter P and I ask you to rotate it 180 degrees, are you going to get the letter B or the letter D? Using your visual spatial sketchpad in your head, you've already visualized the letter P and rotated it 180 degrees and seen that it comes out to a little lowercase d. Next, we're going to talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load is the total amount of mental resources, such as sensory memory or working memory or long-term memory, that it takes to perform any given task. There are a couple types of cognitive load. They are intrinsic cognitive load, extraneous cognitive load, and germane cognitive load. Intrinsic cognitive load is the amount of cognitive processing required from a task. It does not include outside stimuli. Extraneous cognitive load is the resources required to process stimuli that is not relevant to the task. And germane cognitive load is the deep processing of information related to a task and application of prior knowledge in forming new understandings. A good use of germane cognitive load is when instructors ask their students to explain their thoughts through discussion with a partner. Your working memory is constantly in use, so holding information here is hard and takes a lot of work. To keep this information active, we can use different forms of rehearsal, maintenance and elaborative. Maintenance rehearsal is repeating the information in your mind, just like when Dory repeated P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. Elaborative rehearsal is connecting the information to knowledge you already have. For instance, connecting someone with the name Abe to Abraham Lincoln. This way, you only have to make the connection to remember their name and not repeat it over and over again, like Dory. Not all information that we receive and learn can be stored in our memory forever. Forgetting information can be directly related to decay and/or interference. Interference occurs when processing new information gets in the way or gets confused with old information. As new information is brought into the working memory, old information is lost. Loss of attention leads to decay. Not paying attention to information causes it to become less activated in your mind and eventually unable to be reactivated or retrieved. This could be when we stop rehearsing something in our mind. We're no longer actively keeping that in our working memory, and so it eventually decays and we forget it. On the bright side, forgetting information can be useful because it keeps our working memory from becoming overloaded. Alright, that marks the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening, everybody, and happy Wednesday, my dudes.